approve the agenda by Mr. Forsythe, Mr. Zhang. All in favor?
Aye.
We would like a motion to approve the minutes from July 10th. Moved by Mr. Forsythe, Mr. Hall. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Moving forward, we will have the 2022 audit final results by Molepi and Drescher LLP. Gentlemen, would you like to talk and get that to here if you want?
Okay,
Or whatever you're comfortable.
he's gonna talk for all of it. Have a good seat. Good evening, everybody. My name is Luke Malecki. I was engagement partner on your external financial statement audit. With me is Charles Trottier, the senior manager that oversaw the day-to-day operations. We're here to present the results of your external audit. The financial statements are in draft form being reviewed by management and the audit committee this evening. And we anticipate to release those shortly. We're just waiting on a couple of remaining pieces of audit documentation, just some standard letters that we expect to receive shortly and should be able to release in a few weeks from now. The main reason that we are hired, I'll make sure it's there. If you go to the next slide, is to form an opinion on your financial statements. What we do is we'll perform a series of tests on your general ledger to determine whether or not they reasonably present the financial condition of the county as of December 31st, 2022, and for the year that ended. As a result of our procedures, we're able to form an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion. That's what you're looking for. As part of our audit, we do look at some internal controls. We are not internal control auditors, but we look at your internal controls as they relate to the financial statement presentation. And if anything were to come to our attention that would warrant the attention of this group, we would label that as a significant deficiency or material weakness. We had no such items in this year's audit, so very clean audit as far as that goes as well. The next bullet there is referred to as a single audit. You receive a significant amount of federal awards. Anyone that receives over $750,000 of federal awards is exposed to the requirements of uniform guidance, which will trigger a single audit. This year we tested 4 of your programs. The most risky of which is the new program of ARPA, and some of your ARPA funding coming back and forth. We also looked at foster care, Medicaid, and the aging cluster. Each of those came back with a clean bill as well, so no finding in those items all as well. When you look at it, those key areas there, those would be what we would consider the substance of our work here, and a very, very good job with that. No findings in an unmodified clean opinion. The next bullet there is an auditor communication letter. Won't get into that too much detail. We can talk with it with the audit committee and with management. That will be a formal letter that just really goes over our responsibilities and our roles as well as management's and a couple of key assumptions, estimates, and significant accounting policies. It also identifies that we are independent of the county. We comply with all ethical requirements of independence, and we have full cooperation working with your treasurer's department, as well as, VSS and the other departments throughout the county. The next item is a management letter, which will include some best practices that we see throughout. We work with several different counties throughout the state. We look to use that as a tool to provide some ideas back and forth between the entities, and that will be also included within there. The last bullet is the Department of Transportation report. That's very similar to the single audit, except it relates to state aid and transportation aid, and that as well had no findings or observations. Charles is going to turn it over. If you go to the couple slides down to a financial statement update and just kind of bring us through how they're resolved.
So on this slide here, we're showing the trend over 5 years of how your revenues compared to your expenditures. And so just looking at the charts, you see growth in both revenues and expenditures, and it shows steady fiscal approach in replenishing fund balance from where you were at levels back 6-7 years ago. So anytime your blue line, which here represents your revenues, exceeds your red line, you're showing an increase in fund balance, that systematic increase to get to where your fund balance policy sits at. And so that's what this chart shows. The red line in itself on the far right, where we are in 2022, totals 200. There's no numbers there, but it totals $203 million. Your revenues are at $214.7 million. This chart, by the way, shows the general fund only. That's what we're going to spend most time on today. And so the difference between your blue line, your revenues, and your expenditures this year was $11.5 million. That's your increase in fund balance. Your total fund balance at the end of December 31, 2022 was $59.9 million. That gets broken out to 5 categories according to the standards out there. From most restrictive to less restrictive. One category is called non-spendable fund balance. It's made up mostly of your prepaid items that you pay in advance. That's $3.5 million. You have a category that's restricted. Those are your reserves. Those total $12.6 million this year. That's a $2.6 million increase from last year. Then you have committed fund balance, which again requires action of the board to spend. That committed fund balance represents your workers' compensation. That increased from $3.5 million last year to $7.7 million this year. That's about $4.1 million increase. And then you have assigned fund balance, which represents your encumbrances, what you appropriate in next year's budget. You have some environmental remediation fund set aside there. That's $2.1 million. And then your unassigned fund balance, which is available to you, increased from $30.1 million to $34.1 million. So although your fund balance increased below $11.5 million, $4 million went to unassigned fund balance. Compare that to where that sits when your fund balance policy on the last slide. So year over year, we're going to focus on the next slide here. If we start with revenues, as you can see, it's broken out by sources of funds that are most prevalent and most significant. The first portion there is your non-property tax items, which would be your sales tax in this case. It grew by $6.4 million from the prior year. The second most significant source of revenue here is state and federal aid. That increased by $2.6 million. And really, if we take a step back and we look at the first 3 years compared to the last 2 years, those two most significant sources of revenues pre-COVID were increasing at a rate of 3.5% per year. That was sales tax, whereas your state and federal aid would increase about 4.5% to 5% per year. Since the pandemic, sales tax has increased almost 12%, and your state and federal per year, and your state and federal aid have increased about 10% per year. So where that's going to sit in the future, it's going to be hard to predict, but those are the most variable sources of revenues, and they make up the most significant sources of revenues at the same time. So on the prior slide, that growth in revenues from 5 years to the current year grew at 5% per year. So that's what you got to make up, considering your trends over the last 5 years. Also important on this slide is the third portion there, which is your real property tax and tax items. So over the 5 years, it only grew by just under $2 million. So at a time where your expenses go up 5% per year, you're able to limit your growth in your real property tax to a very nominal amount per year. And then your departmental income, your charge for services, and then you have other revenues and transferred and stay relatively consistent across the board for those 5 years. On the next slide, we focus on the expenditures. So your spending, again, the first column there is your economic assistance and opportunity. And really, those are your a lot of the DSS programs. And so some of the programs came back full go after the pandemic, and they were back running. So economic assistance and opportunity, essentially all your blue portions here. Economic assistance opportunity went up from $68.8 million to $72 million. And then the fourth section there for health went from $17.1 million to $18.7 million. Those two pretty significant increases in expenditures were related to that excess increase state and federal aid that came up with additional programs coming back after being kind of slowed down with the pandemic. So those expenditures went up, but those claims also went up. So those offset one another. And then you also had a pretty significant increase, third from the bottom there, your transfers out went from $11.7 million to $17.7 million. So that's a $6 million increase. Those funds essentially went into health funding, the county growth fund, added some projects related to some ARPA spending and other towards capital projects fund. And then you had some increased transfers out the road machinery fund. And then looking back at other sections here, the bottom line there, other expenditures, those other costs were increased with some of the pandemic and ARPA aid that was earmarked towards some buses and home and community service. On the last slide there, that stacks you up as far as how much unassigned fund balance is available to, as compared to your total spending. And it earmarks you with where you are as far as your policy, your fund balance policy. So at the end of 12/31/2022, you had about 16.8% of available fund balance or unassigned fund balance as compared to your total budget. So as I said, your unassigned fund balance is going to be more like $1 million compared to a budget of about $200 million. So you say 16.8%, that represents about 2 months worth of spending, 2 months being 16.67%. So you're right at that average. And as far as comparing it to the outside best practice that is available out there, Government Finance Officers Association has published years ago a best practice to maintain unrestricted fund balance of about 2 months worth. So that's 16.67% fund balance. So that would be your unassigned and some of your assigned fund balance. So in this case, it only takes the unassigned, but if you were to add in the cost of the increased inflation towards county road machinery, some of the fuel and diesel and other contractual costs that we've seen in the last couple of years, when you add those 3 funds together, you are right at that 2 months or 16.67%. So right where the best practice stands. And then on the last slide here is just our phone number, contact information for Luke and myself. If you have any questions now, we're happy to field them. If you have any questions later on, and to wrap up this year, 2023, talk 2024, we're available. Any questions?
Mr. Lightfoot.
I guess what I'd be looking for is not the very last page, the page that precedes that. Right here. You know, one of the important things that it shows is that St. Lawrence County is at the bottom of the pile of these 5 counties as far as the amounts of money that we have in our fund balances as compared to others. I think that's a good thing, but I think that our county residents need to know that the fund balance that St. Lawrence County has is far from being excessive. It comes in under the guidelines of the state of New York, what their recommendations are for fund balance. It doesn't exceed it. We haven't spent money willy-nilly. And I think that your audit shows that we have followed GASB to the limit. And that as far as generally accepted accounting principles, we followed those to the letter of the law. You found absolutely nothing in your 600 hours of looking at the financials of the county that show that there is anything at all suspect with respect to the financials. And I think that gives a pretty good a look at what your opinion of the treasurer and the treasurer's office is, as well as the county administrator with respect to the budget. They're attentiveness to it and what they've been able to accomplish with this legislature backing them up. And I guess maybe I wanted to go on and on for a minute rather than look for, but I'd like to hear your response.
I agree with everything that you said. I think our clean opinion and the fact that there were no significant deficiencies, no material weakness, not only speaks to the treasurers and the administrators, but the county as a whole. We work with a lot of different departments. Certainly, most of our efforts are dedicated to those 2 departments. Very well said as far as the specifics of it being related to the financial statements. We do test only a sample. So if anything were to come to our attention that kind of would look a little suspicious, we would bring it to the attention of the group we met with prior to this at the audit committee. Nothing did. That's not to say that we looked after every transaction. We just don't have the capacity to do that. But the items that we did look at were certainly within governmental gap. Absolutely. The slide that you referred to, we didn't share that with this presentation, but just if I could go through a narrative as to what comps that we use. So what we did is we looked at some of the other comps similar counties in size and budget to yours at the New York State Controller's Open Book New York site. And we looked at where they are in unassigned fund balance compared to their annual spending. Jefferson County, just to the south of us, is at 22%. Just as a reminder, you guys were at 16.8%. Wayne County was at 55.9%. Oswego County was at 29.7%, and Warren County was at 25.9%. So you're correct in that you were the lowest out of those comps, and those aren't hand selected. We've been looking at those same comps probably the last 7 years, maybe 5 to 7 years. So it's certainly each of those counties had growth over the last 3 years with the sales tax that Charles was talking about. And yours went more out to the public because your fund balances didn't grow by the same extent that those other counties, according to the data from New York State.
Thank you.
Anyone else with a question? Okay, seeing none. Gentlemen, thank you. Ruth, did you want to say anything? Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have probation. We have a resolution modifying the 2020 probation document again. Work that second by
This is just a request. It's over the $5,000. That group is able to transfer on her own. This was a larger than normal amount because during COVID, my secretaries had a lot of time, extra time on their hands. They weren't getting bombarded at the window and stuff. So it's just not 70,000 documents to be scanned and saved. So that's why we got such a big bill. So this hopefully won't happen often. I don't think we'll have as many documents.
Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. LePage. Next up, we have human resources. Have a resolution authorizing the chair to sign an agreement with Discover eGov for the assignment of a contract with Discover eGov to governmentjobs.com Inc. doing business as NeoGov, moved by Mr. Hall, seconded by Mr. Forsythe. Go ahead.
So in 2019, the county entered into an agreement with Discover eGov to provide new computer software for our CRC roster card application, which is a civil service record maintenance system. The roster card software provides the capability to process, record, and track the employment status of all public employees, including the 70 agencies outside of St. Lawrence County government and within St. Lawrence County government. Track the statuses of those employees, track exams, exam applicants, eligible list, certified list, payroll certifications, as well as it provides an applicant web-based portal with the capabilities of online applications, online exam fee payments, applicant email alerts for future exams, and so on. Our current agreement with Discover eGov remains in effect through the expiration date of 12/31/2028. Discover eGov has sold to NeoGov, and NeoGov will become the counterparty to the agreement with Discover eGov and assume all obligations and liabilities. We anticipate the benefit. We do anticipate benefits to this assignment to include enhanced functionality and additional products such as onboarding and training. There will be no change in the maintenance and support fees through the end of the current contract, 2023 or 2028. So therefore, I'm requesting authorization for the chair to sign an agreement with eGov for the assignment of Discover eGov agreement to NeoGov after this process.
Any questions on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much. Next up, Harry, I will let you introduce your resolution.
Sure. This resolution is to support a bill to amend the social services law in relation to establishing the Child Abuse Reporting Expansion Act.
Is there a second? Any discussion? Okay,
This bill is just currently in Albany. It's been on the agenda for 3 or 4 years. It's currently reintroduced. Our state senator for our district anyway, Mark Walczyk, is now a co-sponsor of this bill. And this adds to many other professional people who are required to report what they consider to be child abuse to authorities so that it can be made aware of it. And I don't have any problem supporting this. It seems pretty straightforward.
anyone else? This is Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over 28 states have adopted this bill, a law that requires clergy to be mandated reporters, along with a multitude of other people who are mandated reporters. It's the expansion act of an act that was already a law in New York State. It does carve out pastoral communications in the form of confession. If anybody's read the bill, they can see that that's in there. And it is still on the in the committee for the Children and Families Committee as of 5:30 this evening. I verified that with one of the legislative analysts or sponsor of that bill. So we hope that people will support it. It's important, and it's about kids.
Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing I didn't notice, I read through the legislative aspect of this. Why aren't attorneys on there? District attorneys, assistant district attorneys aren't noted. Why is that? Anyone know?
Mr.
Attorney?
Line them up. You don't have a light there. You might as well.
Now,
Yes, go right ahead.
As Ms. Haggard indicated, several states actually have included attorneys in these listings, but what you'll see is that approximately 4 years ago, there were only about 4 states from the country that actually included these provisions. Over the course of the last 4 years, you've seen a massive expansion of the states that have adopted these mandated reporter provisions, and many of them have adopted it for everyone. I strongly suspect that it hasn't been challenged. At least I've read through Texas as a state that adopted it with respect to attorneys as well. Attorneys obviously have a very special, right? That relationship is such that if they learn of activity of prior crime, they're not permitted to report it. But if they learn of activity related to a proposed crime that is active that harms someone else, they in their good judgment can decide whether or not to. We actually have a similar provision with respect to our ethical guidance here in New York State. If I know someone is going to go out and harm someone, and my client tells me they're going to go out and harm someone, and I know it's actionable, I have the discretion to report that. New York State has not moved to the step of including the attorneys at this point. Right now, as far as I know, the CARE Act only has to do with the addition of clergy into the mix. I think that answers the question you posed.
Would it be possible to amend it to make it include attorneys, or would that be just null and void from the get-go?
I mean, theoretically, you could. I don't know how many attorneys would be very comfortable with that, given the fact that much of what is related to them during the course of representation is supposed to be sacrificed. Supposed to be united in interest with the client, and very different. The client has the suspicion that they're constantly or this could be.
The other part of this is I heard that Senator Walczyk was a co-sponsor of the bill. I reached out to Senator Stack, who's my representative in Lisbon, as well as Assemblyman Gray, and I didn't get a response where they stand on this. So, and it didn't sound like it's moving anywhere right at the present time.
That's that's my understanding. In fact, I believe it has been introduced 3 years previously and not been passed, and I believe it was introduced in this session, but it's placed in.
So my comfort level would be to talk to the other, as well as someone in Blankenbush. I haven't heard from him. I think at least I should know where all 4 of them stand on this before I go making this decision. Is it possible if I'd make a motion to table it till at least the next finance or next operations still? So we can
Is
hear
there
from
a
them.
second
I
for
feel
the
better
table?
about it, but that's up to everyone else.
Seconded by Mr. Sheridan, Mr. Webster, and Mr. Lightfoot. No discussion on this. All in favor?
All right,
Aye. People who are taken. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. So, Mr. Webster?
My question is for Mr. Butler. I understand how this would, if someone come in and confess for clergy, he'd be forced automatically to basically also services of government. What other things does that cover other than just clergy? I know this law encompasses a lot more. Could be schools or counselors. What else is this law? I know we're all concentrated on saving kids.
So I'm glad you brought that up. When we originally discussed this, and this board has discussed this issue before, there was a point raised by a North Country Now article afterwards, said, well, there's a carve-out exception. Carve-out exception says that if you're in the confines of providing confessional to a clergy member, that protected, that speech is protected. If you recall, Mr. Reagan asked him specifically, said, I'm a Catholic parishioner, I walk into a Catholic church, I go into confessional and I communicate the confessional, is that communication protected? And I said, well, actually, theoretically not. Let me explain why not. As a mandated reporter isn't necessarily about what is verbally communicated to you per se. If you are a preacher, you're operating in a church scenario, you're a rabbi, you're operating in a synagogue scenario, you're a priest, you're operating in a Catholic church, and you observe something when they're walking in, before they've even gotten to the confessional box, that gives rise or gives pause or gives concern to something that you have to report, you may end up having to report. And I'll go a step further. The mandated reporter provisions don't just apply to sexual abuse. They don't just apply to physical abuse. The definition of neglect is largely defined by court proceedings, and court proceedings in New York State have found that neglect may result from a failure to provide an appropriate clean house, may result from a failure to provide a medical treatment that the state deems necessary. There have been arguments around the country about which types of vaccination should be required and which types of vaccination shouldn't be, whether or not certain vaccinations should be classified as necessary, and if they are medically necessary and denied by the parent, does that rise to the level of medical neglect? I can tell you that as a pastor or a preacher or a priest, or as a rabbi or an imam in a mosque, if they observe something that gives rise or gives pause, and it is beyond sex abuse or beyond physical abuse, but something about the family, something about the engagement of the child, something they see at vacation Bible school. As a mandated reporter, that now falls into the spectrum. So it's not so simple as to say, will the communication between the priest and the parishioner be protected? Yes, theoretically, if they are in the confines of that confessional box and they are making a disclosure as a part of their salvation. But if it is something that is seen outside on the way into the confessional box, if it is on the way to a picnic, if it is on the way to a group gathering, it is theoretically possible that they would be expected to have to disclose that material. So yes, being a mandated reporter is far more than just abuse. It includes neglect. Neglect is oftentimes defined by the state.
Mr. Reagan?
But under the provision of this act, if a person goes into the confessional and makes a confession, the priest is not required to violate the sanctity of the confession. That's my reading of the actual amendment. Is that
Well,
correct?
Let's break that down. a little.
But isn't that what it says?
And well, it's a little bit difficult for you to apply that to all religions. So
I'm
yes,
not
Catholicism-
applying it to all religions.
for Catholicism, that's correct.
Okay.
But if you're in a Protestant faith, it doesn't matter the natural act of confession. What constitutes the act of confession for them? So that ends up being somewhat difficult for Protestant faiths. Oftentimes you don't have a licensed or ordained minister. There is some language in the exception that would seem to suggest that someone acting in a lay minister capacity might qualify for that. But I say that they might because I don't know. That it's fairly open.
Point of order. Mr. Button was asked to come to the microphone to address the question about an attorney being required.
And Mr. Reagan is questioning about the. No, you're right. Please hold a second.
If you recall, Mr. Webster then posted a question to you
Yeah.
related to the
Regarding
expansive
something else.
nature of the bill itself, and then Mr. Reagan posed a question.
So I think that what we're doing is because we have our accounting. Legal questions regarding this, I think, that are posed to the county attorney should be answered. So is Mr. Reagan done?
Yeah.
Okay, Mrs. Haggard, you're next up.
Thank you. I'd like to call for a vote on this, please.
So you need a second. Your second, please, Mr. just a second. All in favor of voting?
Is Larry,
Oh. Oh, can you wait a second? See, when somebody calls for a vote, are they allowed to?
No,
got the second.
gotta be a second.
There was a list, sorry. Will you allow Mr. Janish's question?
And then we'll take the vote right after this question.
Well, I think that we vote on whether or not you were the first. I'm looking for a second still.
I thought somebody.
No, he raised his hand and wanted to ask the question. She'll allow your question. Go ahead, Mr. Keisha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It wasn't so much a question, comment. I took the liberty of speaking with three members of the Protestant clergy in regards to this. All three were in favor of this legislation. So I think when you have members of the clergy that are in favor of this legislation, they are certainly more well versed in what their obligations are. So I think it's important to know. They were members of the process.
So Mr. Jeanette is the second for calling the question. Yes? Take the vote on the- Okay, vote to call the question. All in favor? 1, 2. 3. Now we take vote.
We have a roll call vote.
Mr. Schmidt is up.
Yes.
Webster,
No.
Burke,
Yes.
Jeanette,
Aye.
Terminelli? Yes. Kern? I'm being asked to vote on something I'm not allowed to discuss. I don't know what to do with that. What do I do with that, Steve?
So vote. Passing forward.
Okay. I would say no right now because I don't have all the information that I need to render an opinion. Reagan,
Yes.
Forsythe,
No,
Lightfoot,
No,
Sheridan,
No, because of things like paragraph 3, where it says, whereas this amendment seeks to add 5 new paragraphs to subdivision 1 of the section 14 of the social service law that describe the conditions associated with required reporting definitions. I don't know what those 5 new paragraphs are in that subdivision. I don't think anybody in this legislature knows what they are. And if they do, that'd be nice to know before we voted on this, but we're hurried to ram down a really important issue in terms of power that we have. So that's my vote's no.
Yes.
Yes. No.
Paul? Okay. 7 yes, 7 no, 1 abstain.
Doesn't pass.
The resolution fails. All right, next on. County Administrative Report. In keeping with the resolution you considered this evening with regard to records management, there are 2 transfer of funds. I believe you heard the probation director mention that there is up to a certain authority I'm able to transfer funds. The resolution you considered exceeded that authority. So 2 transfer of funds for the same reason, document management. The first is also for the probation department in the amount of $1,080.95 for the document management, as well as $1,300 in the amount of $26.53 for the conflict defender, $139.29 for the sheriff's office, $33.16 for personnel, and $550.51 for public health. These were all part of the 2023 shredding event. So important document management. Our records management officer oversaw this process, and we're happy to see more departments getting involved. Wanted to remind you that the Ag Force is coming up this week. Wanted also to mention to you, I know we asked for RSVPs, but if a portion of your day frees up that you could join us, please communicate with me and I'll let you know where we are. If you can even join us for one of the farm visits, we're happy to have you, however it fits in your day. Also, you're used to seeing the vacancy review summary provided to you. On this meeting, there weren't any vacancies to be considered. So next week, I'll provide you that summary with the resolutions to be, or the positions requested for review. And then remember, at finance, I'll make the annual report to you this month as well. Unless there's any questions. Last thing I wanted to do was to thank Director Malecki for their report, both to the audit committee, fiscal stability committee, as well as to this committee. Typically, we see this at finance. Appreciate the chairwoman allowing them to present tonight. But it continues as a message that evolved over time that really began since their engagement with us in 2015. With regards to the importance and priority based on fiscal health. The board, the legislators have supported, and the treasurer's office continues working with department staff. So I thank everyone involved for making this possible for us to continue to see an unmodified opinion with no findings. That is remarkable for us. I believe they said our 5th year with that. So want to not miss an opportunity to thank the folks who work on it all year long, as well as the board that supports our efforts. On to committee reports, agricultural and farmland protection board, Mr. Denise.
Sure, I have nothing to report.
Thank you. Alternatives to incarceration board, Mr. Burr.
There's nothing new to report.
Thank you, sir. Board of Trustees for Supreme Court Library, Mr. Haggard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had our meeting in June and we have a draft report and I'm waiting for the final report.
The Emergency Medical Services Advisory Board has not met since the last time I reported. They took June and August off. The Environmental Management Council, Mr. Mill.
Thank you. So our last meeting was July 19th. Our guest was Dr. Aileen Henry. She's a priest professor of physics from SLU. Dr. Eileen O'Donoghue. She's the Henry Priest Professor of Physics
sorry. And she came to talk to us about the partial lunar eclipse that will be happening in October, and then the total solar and lunar eclipse that will be happening in April 2024. Really just to kind of give us the science behind eclipses and how unique and rare this is for us to be able to have this opportunity to be right in the direct path of it. So part of our conversation focused around the influx of people. The Chamber of Commerce was also at our EMC meeting. The influx of people that we're expecting to come from the north, so across the Canadian borders, primarily Messina and Ogdensburg, that will cross through, and then the people that are going to come from southern New York, from kind of like the southeast up to this area as well, because Canton is right in the direct path of the eclipse. And it's a very, very short amount of time. They're really expecting tens of thousands of people that will come to St. Lawrence County for this event. I know that it's been a conversation for schools about how to kind of honor this event. The total eclipse begins at 3:23. We'll be at max eclipse at 3:25, so about a minute and a half later. And then the total eclipse ends at 3:27. So it's like a 4-minute thing. People will travel all over the world. So it kind of goes from the northeast across kind of to Arizona. So there will be people that will travel all over to be able to see this once in a lifetime thing. She talks about some of the safety issues of looking, you can't look at a solar eclipse. So just some of the eye protection that will need to be considered, some of the viewing events. The chamber will be presenting to us, I believe, sometime in August, and they're going to talk about their tourism plans for it. They would really like to partner with communities and organizations, colleges, schools, whoever is planning to host some of these solar viewing parties, I guess, what have you. So then, of course, the question came up about, as a county, what do we plan to do to kind of prepare for the possibility of an influx of people and to kind of celebrate this moment. If community members are having events, and I'm sure that Brooke will speak to this when they come in from the chamber, but if community members are having events or they're planning anything, they can actually now go on to the visit STLC.com calendar, and they can add their own events right to the calendar page that the chamber shares out. So that was kind of the solar eclipse. And then other business, we talked about recommendations. There's an ad hoc committee has been formed that's looking at the bylaws for the EMC, and they'll be presenting a draft form of those bylaws at the September meeting. Yep, at the September meeting. To the rest of the committee. Shannon Hurlbut, one of our newer members, has been approved to sit on the Public Advisory Committee for expedited review of Plan 2014. And then Neil Woodworth has reviewed DEC's draft management plan for Conifer and Foreign Tract Conservation Easement, shared some comments with DEC on behalf of the EMC. Our next meeting is actually kind of a working meeting. It's our annual picnic at the Waddington Beach area. So if anybody is available Wednesday evening, the picnic starts at 5 o'clock. If you plan to come, if you could just let me know so we can get a head count for food. But 5 o'clock, and then we go into meeting at, I believe we said 6:30, where we'll do a little bit of business. And that's that.
Next up, we have the fire advisory.
Madam Chair, nothing to report since the last report. However, our next meeting is this Thursday, August 17th at 6 p.m. We held at the Human Services Building on 310. And part of the agenda is going to be a discussion on the new radio system, the new towers, antennas in Star Lake and Cranberry Lake, and I'll be doing an overview of the emergency services building capital fund.
Question for you.
Yes.
The technical rescue team, have you heard anything about that? That they're putting a group together to try to get together, a technical rescue team? They've not brought that to you? I think they're eyeing to become part of fire. Just so it's on your radar. Okay, next up, jury board, Mr. Sheridan.
Rewarded on that.
Thank you, sir. Planning board with Mr. Fay.
Okay, some projects were set back for local action. We looked at a project on 310 in Canton, for solar panels. Again, we're still talking solar panels. The one on 310 was not approved because of prime farmland. And there was one in the village of, well, not the village, but the hamlet of Madrid. Basically, it was looked at too, which was not approved because of prime farmland. And it means ends up with a big discussion over prime farmland now too, because of the magnifying effect that we have by taking it out, but we're losing all the labor, the products produced, the multiplying effect that takes place when you produce food on property. But at the same time, when we're looking at these, that when we go back to home rule, it's kind of hard to tell a retired or someone who's ready to retire, and their retirement is centered around the money they're going to receive over the solar panels. So a lot of times we're going back to home rule, and I think that home rule is going to overrule. But our recommendation to the county is, because we are voting in almost every case that there's prime farmland, not to approve. And there's a mix there right now, and a lot of discussion went on, maybe we should have a real economic study done on basically what we're giving up by putting solar panels on prime farmland. And I think it's a real concern, maybe we should be doing it. And one in town of Messina, which is a fairly big one, and that one brought up battery storage too. So the big question now is, what are we going to do? Or are we going to take action after we've had that fire on the battery storage ones? This is, I think, is going to have an effect on our quality of air and everything else that's taking place here. So there's a lot of things that are still up in the air that the planning community.
Mr. Forsyth.
Yeah, that was my question for you, Dan, is what are we gonna do with battery storage facilities? Stephen, I had reached out to you just to see the legalities. Maybe it's time to look at a moratorium of some sort on these, but we're not able to do it, or you didn't feel we probably wouldn't be able to do it, but it's definitely concerning after watching what they went through, and I believe it was Lyme. So what's your thoughts?
Come on up. Mr. Butler, let me get his step.
And I believe there's a state initiative by representatives starting to be led on this. So.
Yeah, so I know this board is fairly familiar with the fact, and I know you have expressed your opinions many times about the fact that the county's been fairly marginal with respect to our ability to control siting and to be involved in major energy projects. I know you're all aware there's an energy project that is proposed for right here in Canton that has obviously generated a lot of public comment locally. But what we really learned as we looked closer at the law, looked closer at what our options were, is that the voices, if any, are fairly nominal and limited to your towns and villages. Cities, counties don't have really any say or during the course of the site. So the question you posed to me was whether or not the county could get involved with a moratorium on development of solar storage locations, battery locations, because I suspect it was prompted, if I recall correctly, in the discussion by the fire that had taken place south of us. And my response to that was that we really don't have much of a role in there, given the way the legislature is structured.
See, I take issue with that to an extent. It's the health and safety of the residents of St. Lawrence County. It's not just the residents of Canton. It's not just the residents of Lisbon. It's the whole county that's affected by these things. And I would say the county should have oversight over the health and safety. So where does road hit this? Where does it happen?
While I appreciate the perspective, and I do not disagree with the perspective, the state has occupied that field. There is theory and legal practice known as field preemption, where a subordinate level of government tends to act in an area in which a superior level of government has already expressed its own profound position. The superior form of government will supersede the inferior form, and unfortunately, the states take precedence over local.
even pitch, we call that a trump card.
Mr. Webster,
Kind of a positive twist to this, not the players themselves, but Common Potsdam has a developer that's coming in, that's looking at putting a solar cell on top of the dump in between Nord and Potsdam. It's like a 60 acre. whatever it be. And it's gonna cost them more to do it. But it's good to see someone who is willing to spend the extra money, that's gonna cost more. To put something like that in areas that isn't gonna hurt our community and our county. I mean, it's gonna cost them a lot more to do it, because it has to do special stuff, so it doesn't go through lighting. But if they're using property that's just basically a wasteland. And it would be good to see more, give preference to developers like that over someone who's going in and covering 500 acres of farmland.
Mr. Fay, was there anything additional to your report, sir?
I think that one of the things that we gotta be conscious of too is basically to put out one of these battery fires, the water that is required, or what way are they gonna smother it? So basically, I think that's a big concern too, of what's going to happen to our fire departments, and what are they going to do? What are the safety precautions have to be taken if we have tremendous amounts of water in some places, there's something where those solar panels are. I don't think there are good sources. I mean, there's another concern that it seems like it's jumping up at us, and I simply say the game of solar panels is a game of dollars. These companies aren't coming in from basically all around the world, put solar panels up here because they basically, I feel in their contracts, have to be guaranteed a return. Word guaranteed. Now, most people go in business don't have that word guaranteed attached in. So I think it's something we have to be conscious of too. I don't know, as our current county attorney told us, what we've got to, we haven't got the trump card, I guess. It's games that we play. I think we've got to be conscious of it, stay on top of it before we get burnt bad up here.
Okay, Mr. Denisha has a question.
Thanks. Just I want to build on what Mr. Forsythe said. You know, and what Mr. Page just mentioned, the water. There's going to be, I have no idea how much water that would be required to put this out. But that water is used to put out the fires. The water's going to go somewhere. It's going to go potable water supply, with some of the croplands. It's the pollutants, whatever they may be, could be broadcast over a huge area. So I think that needs to be a consideration.
Mr. Jeanette,
I just had a question. Are you saying putting water, using water to put out the fire? Because
I
I
actually
hope
was
not.
just about to ask you the same question.
Absolutely. There's a reason why a lot of these electrical cars, it's let them burn because they're chemical fires. You're gonna put water on it. Did you put water on a grease fire? I hope not. You have to extinguish this. That's, that's why they let these burn, because they burn and they're not prepared to put these out. So
They make blankets.
there's plenty,
that
but
fire
normally
departments
you'll
use
see more
for
Tesla
cars.
burning than put out. They're not solid. But water, absolutely not.
Lithium. In science class, this is way off topic. Remember in science class, they tossed the lithium into the pond and when people skipped across, that's what we're dealing with. So I agree, batteries should be an issue that we discussed, Mr. Burke.
On the other side of the equation is that 100 state shut down over in Brazier. Seen it. Most of it practically. And it was an issue with the DEC, and I think if we're gonna seek out protect the environment, we should probably have an alternative built on land that's not desirable. And there was no solar storage over there.
No, that was the direct link and keep in mind that DEC still permitted 4 inches of topsoil to be scraped off 2 years earlier off that site. Anybody else? Mr. Lightfoot.
I'll either old or new business.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else on Mr. Fave thing? Thank you. Okay, old and new business, old business first. Anybody? Seeing none, Mr. Lightfoot.
Well, I think it's old because it has to do with the previous resolution that was presented at this meeting. Okay, and what I want to comment on is I had my hand up and I didn't get to speak. I had my hand up like this. From now on, you and everybody else will see my hand.
I really didn't see
I
it.
know that, and I understand. You had a lot of people wanted to talk about it, okay? I am thoroughly upset that a premature motion to call a question was presented and voted on and passed, okay? There's a lot of things that go on in here that everybody really doesn't want to hear. And we're subject to it. And even the excesses that some of us go to explain our positions or talk about somebody else's position with respect to resolutions. I resent the fact that I didn't get a chance to voice my opinion about this because there are a couple of things that weren't brought out that I think are important. I'm not going to bring them out now because it's a moot point. The resolution was defeated. But there's a hell of a lot more to this than meets the eye. I now probably will get tattooed with he's against children because he voted against. Is that fair? I don't think so. I voted against it, but I didn't get the opportunity because of a motion, a hurried motion after what, 2 or 3 people had spoken. I didn't get recognized, not your fault, and I don't blame you. But I think that if somebody's got something to say, we're duty bound to sit and listen to it, even if you don't like it, okay? And there's a lot, I'm sure that everybody or a lot of us would agree that there are things that we distaste about some of the things that we have to discuss, okay? Obviously, this is not a pleasant one that we have to discuss. And I think that for the 7 people that voted against this, there shouldn't be any stain on their reputations because they voted against it. Those folks, and myself included, I believe, had given the issue some thought and weren't satisfied with what they were hearing, okay? I don't want to see the day come when my wife is forced to perhaps testify against me or speak against me. I don't want a lawyer that I hire telling what I told him. There is those in the state of New York in the criminal procedure law, there are provisions for privileged communication. A Catholic priest takes an oath under canon law, which it's the law that governs them. They take an oath to Jesus Christ that they will not divulge what goes on in confession, what they hear. If there were somebody that would say, okay, we'll take a carve out for something like that, or make an exception for something like that, I don't think you'd find a priest in the world that would say, I'm not going to report any of this. I think they all would, and I would support something like that, but I can't support this. And I hope what I've had to say, it isn't a matter of a foul ball or whatever. I'm just concerned about allowing everybody to have the opportunity to speak their mind. When I sat up there, everybody did. I can tell you that I had lists of names that were next to speak that went on and on for some of the things that we talked about. And this could have been and should have been one of them. Thank you.
So under old business, I kind of am going to address that. I had a bit of a list. I sort of expected that discussion to be a couple of hours. I did not call the question. I have, you've been here. Once someone calls the question, if there's a second and people pass that, our opportunity to express ourselves is then muted. It almost steps onto your freedom of speech,
Right.
if you will. But that's what the people who moved to call the question were comfortable with, is having people not be able to have their turn to speak. I apologize for missing you, sir.
And you need not do that.
Okay, any new business? Mr. Reagan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to echo something that Ms. Terminelli said a little while ago. On the total eclipse, my little business in Ogdensburg has already had people from as far away as Tennessee make reservations. I'm filled for that event. My wife was quite shocked. She wasn't aware of the eclipse and hadn't even realized that we were already near. We only have 5 rooms, and 4 of the rooms had already been booked online, so she didn't know that. And a gentleman called from Tennessee and said, "Do you have any rooms left for this date?" And she was like, "Well, I'm sure we do. It's April, of next year." And then when she looked, she was like, "My God, this will fill us up completely. What is going on?" He's like, "Oh, it's the total eclipse. I'm coming from Tennessee. I'm so pleased that there's still a room left in Ogdensburg." So, I know many of us found it a little hard to believe that there are some people out there who intend to travel long distances to witness this. But I'm very pleased that the county chamber is working on this. I know there are event organizers planning to hold events in Ogdensburg. We've already developed our playlist of music for the total eclipse of the sun.
Thank you, Mr. Reagan. Anyone else with new business? Mr. Forsythe.
I just wanted to know what's on the playlist. I gotta know.
Probably if my house is finished by then, my camper will be for rent. No other new business. Do we have a need for executive session?
We do for litigation, negotiation, personnel, which is the medical, financial, credit, or employment history of a particular person or corporation, or matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person, or corporation, and we have 1 point.
Mr. Combs? Moving. There's no further business. Motion to adjourn.